that's what drove me at that point, that I would be able to. I also did not consider that I was stepping down from fine art to craft, because for me, looking at pottery in the museums, the pots that speak to us across culture and across time, I found that the pots that we loved or that had meaning were pots that transcended their vesselness. They were hollow form sculpture for me. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that when you looked at them, you knew that there was another dimension inside pushing out, that gave them a liveliness and a dynamic. So when I started to work as a potter, I didn't think I wasn't making sculpture. This was simply going to be functional sculpture, in my mind. One faced social attitudes afterwards. I mean, I discovered what the social attitudes were because I had friends who were sculptors who said, "What, you're being a potter?" Right? Okay. So after mastering the wheel, and I was very fortunate because Karen Carnes, as a teacher, had learned pottery in an Italian factory. Now, what does that mean? That means that somebody who's trained in a factory usually masters one shape at a time with the least amount of motions going towards the final result. So there had to be clarity of intention, economy of means to get where you were going. And that kind of technique actually translates the energy of the decision making is translated into the throwing and into the body of the piece. Most of our people who study pottery in this country, because there wasn't a continuous tradition of pottery making, so that when potters began to teach potters in schools, time was not an important element. The student very often didn't have to know exactly what they were going to make when they were beginning. You'd walk up to a student, and I would say, well, I haven't made up my mind yet. Whereas in a factory, you'd start, it would be like making a chuck on a lathe. The shape of your mound that you were going to throw was different for each shape you were going to make, so you would get there most quickly. In other words, if you were making a bowl that was doing this, you'd start with a solid that was this. You'd open in a V so that when you expanded, it wouldn't get thinner and thinner. So that was one of the things that I learned as a potter, and I found that it worked, and it was a ritualized technique that you couldn't forget, even if you couldn't be with it for 4 or 5 years, which happened when I was raising my kids. There was a period when I didn't touch clay for 5 years, but when I went back to it, it's like learning to ride a bicycle, I guess. You don't forget. Anyway, so that was the advantage of having studied with Karen. Years later, my kids had grown. I had built a salt kiln with Karen. First of all, I have to backtrack a little bit and tell you that at one point in the 60s, things were pretty tight. And I was with F.C. Richards, and we were in Massachusetts. She was looking for a wheel, and we met Harry Hall in Dennis, Massachusetts. And Harry had designed a very nice potter's wheel. So I was going up there to buy a wheel, and MC wanted to find a cheap source for clay. So she's talking to this man who's a potter, and she says, "Everything is so expensive. How can we get clay cheap?" And he said, "I have a customer who buys my pots, who owns a clay mine in Sayreville, New Jersey. His name is Perrine, and he owns the Perrine Mines. So, and I'll call him, and he'll give you clay free, because he's got the mines there. I'll tell him you're worthy of it." Actually linked that. See what happened? Yeah. so I want, how do I reference hard in relation to this?
90 years and 2 minutes.
In art we have something called the unity of opposites. What do I mean by that? Well, let's talk about sound in music. You have a chord. You don't know what it is unless it's the company of another chord. So then you have a major chord and a minor chord. A cut across. And then, I think that's the front of it, I can't tell. I'm going to come around and see. Okay. So that's my reference to heart. I don't know whether this is going to do it, because it's not going to leave me it's not going to leave me a sharp enough edge. But what I wanted to show you is that I discovered recently that if I use the edge of the thing, you see what I can do? Beautiful. Mark, I want it both to be sharp and to be also fugitive, to move into the clay. I'm just not